Welcome to this third session of the course on customer value management. In session 2, we talked about how to evaluate customers. You may remember we talked about customer lifetime value first, which is the value that customers bring by purchasing products and services. And then we extended it to include other components, specifically social value or the value of social interactions like on social media platforms. Well, today we talk about how to manage customers depending on their value. And we do this from two angles. We look first at the top of the pyramid. In this context, we talk about loyalty programs, because very often loyalty programs are used to identify a firm's best customers and to treat them in somehow a special way. And then we talk about the bottom of the pyramid and specifically unprofitable customers and how to deal with them. You will probably see that the layout of my slides has changed. So it's a different background, it's a different colors, but the content is the same, so don't worry about that. This will be the layout that you will see for the sessions going forward. But before we talk about any of this, I want to talk about something that is called the service profit chain. And the service profit chain is a conceptual framework that explains how service companies become profitable. And I want to use these frameworks in order to justify why we need something like a loyalty program in the first place. So what is the service profit chain? Well, the service profit chain is conceptually relatively easy. Assume we are a hair cutter providing any kind of service. So as a hair cutter, we provide the service of cutting hair, right? Hairdressing. Assume we are a hairdresser and all our employees are very satisfied. Well, if our employees are satisfied, two things should happen. First, our employees do not want to leave. Why would they want to leave an employer where they are satisfied with? So employee retention should be high and they should be productive because they like their work. So employee productivity should be high. There's even a link between retention and productivity in the sense that the longer an employee is around, the more experience the employee has, the more productive he or she may be. Retention and productivity should lead to the fact that they do, well, let's say good haircuts. So they provide high service value. And if the service value is high, then customers should perceive high service quality and hence be satisfied. If the service quality and satisfaction are high, they should be loyal. And if they're loyal, they should come back, which means there should be an increase in revenue and an increase in profit. And if the company makes more money, then they can invest more money into their employees and employees can become even more satisfied. If you look at this chain, it all starts with employee satisfaction. And in this logic, there is no need why we would need a loyalty program. Because as long as our employees are satisfied and we cascade down that chain, we get profitable sort of automatically. Now, the problem with the service profit chain is that it is true on average. So if you look at all the service companies all over the world, on average, what I just explained is true. However, there are many, many cases where the on average doesn't hold. And it is these cases where very often companies may consider using loyalty programs in order to, let's say, fix those broken links of the service profit chain. We discuss 3 of them in more detail in the following couple of minutes. The first one is the link between service value and service quality. The second is the link between customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. And the third is the link between loyalty and profitability. But before we talk about all those things that do not work, the yellow ones on this slide, let's give you some empirical evidence for the things that do work. This is an article that has been published in The Economist a couple of months ago. And what you see here is that across a couple of different industries, very varied, retail, manufacturing, travel, oil, gas, energy, and utilities, if you plot employee satisfaction on the x-axis and customer satisfaction on the y-axis, there tends to be a positive relationship for service companies, retail and travel and tourism, but not necessarily for goods companies like manufacturing, oil, gas, energy, and utility. Look at the light blue curve that goes upwards for retail and travel, but that is either flat or goes downwards for manufacturing, oil, gas, energy, and utilities. So this provides empirical evidence that there is indeed a link between employee and customer satisfaction. But you also see that the spread of the different companies that you have, the spread of the different data points is really, really large. So this curve doesn't really describe perfectly well how every single company reacts. And this is the reason why I said that this holds true on average, but in many cases, there may be exceptions. So let's look at the first of these exceptions. And this is the link between service value and service quality. Well, in order to understand the relationship between service value and service quality, we need to understand what quality even means in a service context. Because services are very different from goods. If you want to buy a good, a car, let's say, or even a mobile phone, or any type of item that you can hold in your hands, you can make a very, very educated decision prior to purchase. You can look at all the mobile phones in the market. You can make an Excel sheet where you compare them based on how good their camera is, how much storage they have, and then you can decide for whatever you fits best. You can look at these different criteria. You can rank the brands according to their criteria. You can make a weighting, and you can determine your perfect personal phone, let's say. With services, this doesn't work that way. If you move to a new city or a new town or a new country, let's say, and you need to get your hair cut, it is really, really hard to choose a hairdresser because you don't know. And the problem that you don't know means you only know afterwards whether the hairdresser was good, namely once you went there and you decide that whatever haircut you got is a good or a bad haircut. And this means that the quality that you perceive of the service is less objective than of a good because it depends on a very crucial relationship, namely the difference between what you expect to get and what you perceive you got. You are satisfied whenever a service that you get exceeds your expectations, and you are dissatisfied when it does not exceed your expectations. There's a whole literature about this related to service quality, and I put one very, very famous article on this slide, and I also put it into the supplementary readings that explains this in much more detail. But essentially, your expectations are driven by word of mouth, by your personal needs, by your past experience. Word of mouth means when somebody tells you this is a good hairdresser, you suddenly have higher expectations. Personal needs. For some people, having good hair is more important than others. So whatever they expect in terms of quality may be higher than for others. And past experience, if you have been at a hairdresser before and the quality was and the service you got was good, then your expectations go up for the next time. We talk about this on the next slide. And the quality that you perceive in a service is a function of the magnitude and direction of the gap between expectation and what you actually get. And this makes service value or service quality really tricky because objectively the same kind of service that you get, that two people get, may lead to vastly different perceptions in quality. Assume the same hair cutter cuts the same type of hair, has the same hair cutting process for every single customer. For 10 customers, 3 may be satisfied because this specific type of haircut exceeds their expectations, and 7 may be dissatisfied because it doesn't. On top, there is this very crucial relationship of past experience. Because every single time you go back to the same service provider, you will adjust your expectations. The first time you go, you may not expect that much. You get a certain service. There is a relatively large gap, so you perceive the quality to be high. But the next time you go, you have realized that whatever you expected in the first time was too low. So you adjust your expectation upwards. And if you assume that the actual perceived value that you get is the same, then the quality that you perceive would become lower. The quality gets lower not because the haircut got less good, but because your expectation of what you're supposed to get got up. And over time, this leads to the fact that service quality or the perceived service quality can go down over time, even if the objective perceived value that you get is the same, simply because you readjust your expectations. And companies have come up with several different ways of actually fighting against this constant increase in expectations. And one of them is randomized service quality. And there's a nice article about this. I put this also into the supplementary readings. And this means that occasionally you fail. Take Uber as an example. The first time you order an Uber car, the app tells you it takes 10 minutes and the car arrives in 10 minutes. The second time you order an Uber car, you expect the car to be there in 10 minutes, and the app tells you it arrives in 5 minutes. And you're really, really happy about this because it's faster than you expected. The third time you open the app, you actually expect the car to be there at 5 minutes. The app tells you it arrives in 3 minutes. And again, you are happy because the car arrives faster than you expected. But obviously, this process cannot go on forever. So what companies sometimes do is that randomly, they provide you with a less good service. So let's say the next time you open the app and you expect 3 minutes, Uber tells you the car takes 15 minutes. And you call this an optimal service failure rate. So you determine on an individual level customer at which interval you should fail them. And you fail them in order to reset their expectations. Well, this depends on a lot of factors. It depends on how costly providing a certain level of service is, on the company cost structure. It depends on the damage. Obviously, having a car 5 minutes late may be less bad than having a really, really bad haircut, for example. And it depends on heterogeneity, because some customers may react worse to certain types of service failures than others. But it's a very efficient strategy to reset those expectations. And you can actually even use it to increase your income in the second round by selling a prevention strategy, like a protection plan that protects you from these randomized service quality. The point being is, and now let me go back to this initial framework, there is the link between service value and service quality is really not that easy. Obviously, on average, if haircuts get better, so if the service value gets higher, the perceived quality goes up. But since the quality not only depends on the actual service value, but also on the expectations, it's really, really very, very different in specific situations. So the link between service quality and service value is less strict than what I presented you when I present that slide. Now, what is relatively established is that higher perceived service quality leads to higher satisfaction. So if you perceive the quality of your haircut to be higher, you are more satisfied. So now let's look at the second relationship, which is the link between satisfaction and loyalty. What you see on this slide is a plot for, I think, about 1,000 companies. It comes out of an article, and I put this article also into the supplementary reading. You put customer satisfaction on the x-axis and customer loyalty on the y-axis. And the solid black line is the relationship that you see. Now you see that on average, this line goes up. Low satisfaction is associated with low loyalty, and high satisfaction is associated with high loyalty. But the relationship is not linear. It's not a very simple relationship. It's actually a pretty messy one, because there are a couple of different characteristics. The first one is this curve is asymmetric. Assume you are at the yellow point, and you have a certain strategy that you can use that increases satisfaction by a certain amount, or that can decrease satisfaction by a certain amount. So out of the yellow point, you move a certain distance to the right, which represents an increase in satisfaction, or a certain distance to the left, which is a decrease in customer satisfaction. What you see on this graph is that you would gain by increasing satisfaction is less than what you would lose by decreasing satisfaction. So dissatisfaction has a greater impact on retention than satisfaction does. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic is, look at the right, which is labeled as trust zone here. Even if satisfaction is very, very high, loyalty is not guaranteed. And there may be many reasons for this. For example, you may be really, really satisfied with a meal in a certain restaurant, but the restaurant may be too far away for you to go there every day. Or the restaurant may be too expensive for you to go there every day. Or you simply don't want to go to the same restaurants every day. Look at mobile games, for example. You may really, really enjoy playing a mobile game, but the mere fact that it's always the same game, even if you enjoy it, sometimes leads to the fact that you want to stop it and play a different game. So there are multiple reasons, be it geographical constraints, budget constraints, or this idea of getting dissatisfied over time because you get bored, which is called satiation, that leads to the fact that the relationship between satisfaction and loyalty, even on the very high levels of satisfaction, is not that strong. And finally, what is probably worst of all is this big part in the middle, which is called the zone of indifference. In this part in the middle, the relationship between satisfaction and loyalty is essentially flat. So if you move a little bit to the right or not, does have nearly zero impact on loyalty. which is a particular problem because most companies sort of operate in that middle part, right? Because very few companies have the luxury of having a very high satisfaction level. And obviously, the companies who have incredibly low satisfaction level, except for certain conditions, probably go bankrupt relatively fast. And on top, this curve looks different for every single industry because it depends on competitive intensity. If you are in a non-competitive zone, a monopoly, let's say, or a market with very few substitutes, let's take an airline or a local train service, or even the metro system in Paris, for example. And if you have no choices, because there's either a regulated monopoly or simply out of competition, there are few substitutes, you will be loyal no matter what, because you have nothing else to choose from. If Air France is the only company that flies from Paris to New York, I mean, even if you hate every single minute of that trip and you have to go to New York, what do you want to do? There's no other airline, you cannot drive. The only option would probably be to take a boat, but that takes forever. So in a non-competitive zone, there is more or less no relationship anymore between satisfaction and loyalty, except at the very low level, where satisfaction is so low that you rather don't go to New York than to go through the pain of this trip. And loyalty programs can help you to enter this non-competitive zone. Because even if there are multiple airlines to choose from, a loyalty program allows you the luxury of being the only airline where the customer can collect points. And so this creates a certain type of commitment or switching cost, which makes you more non-competitive. Of course, this is not at all the same for the highly competitive zone where you have low differentiation and commoditization like fast-moving consumer goods. If you hate the shampoo that you bought last week because you don't like the consistency, because you don't like the color, because you don't like the shape of the bottle, so even very, very minor aspects, you will immediately switch to a new shampoo because there are literally dozens of different options to choose from. And finally, the link between loyalty and profitability. There's a very famous article that has been written in the 1990s by a guy called Frederick Richeld, out of which comes this graph. And you probably have seen this graph before. This graph is the foundation of CRM because it shows that customers become more profitable over time. The idea of this graph is that in the first year, you have to acquire the customer. So you have customer acquisition cost. Remember when we talked about CLV? And then in the following years, you get a base profit. Assume you are an ADSL, an internet provider. So you get your basic subscription for internet services. If customers are satisfied, they probably buy other things from you, increased purchases. Let's say they add a mobile phone subscription or a TV channel subscription to it. There are reduced costs to serve because you know the customer, so you know what works and what doesn't work, and you can stop doing the things that don't work, which means you can reduce cost. There are referrals, which is the whole idea of word-of-mouth programs. And there's even a tiny profit from price premium because you can leverage the switching cost of the customer by knowing that even if you increase prices slightly and customers are satisfied, they probably wouldn't leave. Now, the problem with this article is that essentially I said that customers become more valuable over time. It's the same as with the service profit chain. It's true on average. But if you think about it, there's actually reasons to believe why this may not be true. In order to keep the customer around for such a long time, you constantly need to support the relationship. And specifically, you constantly need to fight against competition. So this revenue stream that you see needs to be balanced with the cost of constantly sustaining the relationship and fighting against competitors. And on top, we have this issue of the constantly increasing customer satisfaction and retention. You know, remember the issue of the repeat purchases that I showed you a couple of slides ago, which means that at some point it may simply no longer efficient to keep the customer around so long because the expectations have risen up to a point where actually only meeting them might already be really costly. And if you think about this, the relationship actually becomes more complicated because you can imagine that you can put customers into 4 buckets. Is their loyalty low or high? And is their profit low or high? And if you do this, you will find out that on average, you have more companies in the gray squares than in the yellow squares, because the gray squares is the relationship that we would expect. Low loyalty associated with low profit, and high loyalty associated with high profit. But there's also reason to believe that there are companies and customers in the yellow squares. There may be a segment of customers who is very loyal, but very low profit. And there may be a segment of customers who is very profitable, but very non-loyal. Now, the question is, which of these squares is larger? Do we have more gray or do we have more yellow? And you see here an analysis that has been made in an article, and I also put that into the supplementary reading, that counts the customers in those different buckets for different types of industries: corporate service provider, grocery retailing, mail order, and direct brokerage. And you see when you add up the grays, it's above 50%. So yes, on average, there is a relationship between profit and loyalty, but it's not that strong because there's also a lot of customers in the yellow. And this is the reason why we need loyalty programs, because in a perfect world, let me go back to that slide. In a perfect world, we would simply trust into the service profit chain. And the only thing which we would do is we would invest into employee satisfaction. But the link between service value and service quality is shaky because of this difference between expectation and perception. The link between satisfaction and loyalty is shaky out of the reasons that we explained. And the link between loyalty and profitability is shaky because you also have to maintain the relationship for a very long period of time. And in order to strengthen all of these links, or to make it more easy, to make a more direct relationship between how long the customer is around and the profit you earn from the customer, we have loyalty programs, and we talk about that in the next section.